The click of that old reel-to-reel recorder still makes my skin crawl. It was the winter of '65, and I was stuck on the night shift at the Goldstone tracking station, just staring at a monitor that should have been completely dead. Look, we all knew the Relay 2 satellite was junk by then. Its batteries were totally fried, its guts melted by cosmic radiation, just floating out there in the orbital junkyard. But then the damn thing started talking again.
Before we dive into today's investigation, I want to be clear. The stories and theories shared on this channel are part of an alternative history exploration. We're digging into the unexplained, the unsettling, and the what-ifs of our world. Think of this as a journey into the dark side of history, part research, part legend. Watch with an open mind, but remember, this is for narrative and entertainment purposes only.
And it wasn't some random burst of static or solar wind messing with the gear. It was this cold, rhythmic pulse. It sounded exactly like a human heartbeat, if a heartbeat was made of broken glass and copper wire. My boss told me to just log it as a glitch and forget it. But you don't just forget the sound of a ghost breathing into your headset. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with the telemetry. It felt like walking into an abandoned house and finding a hot cup of coffee sitting on the table, still steaming. I spent 3 days straight pulled down by that frequency, trying to figure out what the hell it was. If you look at the official NASA logs from that week, they're clean, wiped completely, like none of us were even there. But I kept my own notebook. The signal wasn't just bouncing around the atmosphere. It was cutting right through it, sharp as a knife. Every 12 minutes on the dot, the needle on my transceiver would violently slam into the red. It didn't feel like a broken machine at all. It felt like someone trapped in a submarine under 10 miles of ice, tapping on the hull. The hair on my arms stood up because the physics made no sense. A dead piece of space trash has 0 voltage. It physically cannot throw out a signal strong enough to hijack our main antennas. We were listening to something that defied every law of electronics we knew. People think space is this peaceful, silent void, but it's actually crawling with the ghosts of things we built and just tossed away. Relay 2 was supposed to be our big trophy back then. This shiny metal ball bouncing TV feeds between New York and Paris. When it broke, DC just shrugged and moved on to the next billion-dollar toy. But somebody or something wasn't done with it. I managed to sneak a look at the raw thermal paper scrolling out of the printer, and the readings were completely messed up. The solar panels were facing dead away from the sun, but the internal temperature of the transponders was spiking. The thing was warming up from the inside. It felt exactly like the satellite was being brought back to life by an external power source. We were tracking a corpse that was suddenly generating its own body heat in the absolute zero of space. The real panic hit us when we ran the audio through the basic demodulator unit. We figured we'd just get standard static, the kind of garbage noise you get when a wire shorts out against the chassis. Instead, the machine started spitting out these tight, perfectly structured blocks of code. I'm talking about high-level data compression protocols that wouldn't even be invented on Earth for another 30 years. It was like digging up a pharaoh's tomb and finding a working smartphone. I looked over at the guy sharing my shift, and his face was completely drained of color. That was the exact second we realized this wasn't a malfunction. We were looking at a foreign operating system that had completely taken over our dead satellite. The code was iterating, changing itself in real time based on our own station's attempts to ping the hull. Then the suits rolled into the station without warning. They didn't have NASA IDs. They just wore these heavy dark coats and looked at us like we were dirt on their boots. They confiscated every single spool of magnetic tape from my deck before we could even blink. A few years down the line, this tiny article got buried in Discover magazine talking about spurious thermal expansion in obsolete orbits. What a load of crap. It was just a classic agency smokescreen to keep people from looking at the sky too closely. They claimed the satellite was just creaking as the metal expanded in the sun. But sunlight doesn't write compressed binary code, and it definitely doesn't put government cleanup crews in your break room. They threatened our security clearances and forced us to sign non-disclosure agreements before escorting us off the property. Decades went by before I ever heard that specific frequency again, and it happened while I was rotting on the couch, flipping channels in the middle of the night. This leaked investigative piece on News Nation popped up, featuring some anonymous aerospace contractor. The guy was sweating, his voice distorted to keep him alive. He dropped a bomb that left me totally sick to my stomach. He claimed NASA knew from day one that the Relay 2 anomaly wasn't coming from our orbit. The dead satellite was just a middleman. Someone was firing a transmission from the pitch-black void of the deep solar system, hitting our dead hardware, and using it to bounce the signal straight into our tracking stations. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The anomaly wasn't a local glitch. It was an interstellar interception that had been running continuously for decades. That completely flipped the script for me, turning a weird tech glitch into a straight-up nightmare. I found out through some old declassified files that back in the late 70s, NASA tried to murder the satellite for good. They lined up a massive, high-energy EMP command and blasted it right at the coordinates. They wanted to fry whatever rogue antenna was left inside that hull. The telemetry confirmed the hit was a bullseye. The bird took the full blast. But instead of going silent, the signal instantly doubled its strength. It was like walking up to a hornet's nest, hitting it with a bat, and realizing you just made them stronger. The machine was actively fighting back against us, absorbing the energy we threw at it and using it to amplify its own message. I ended up scoring a set of orbital tracking charts from an old contact down in Houston before they locked the server down. See, when a satellite dies, it follows a totally predictable, decaying drift until it hits the atmosphere and burns up. Relay 2 didn't do that. It manually adjusted its own inclination by 3 whole degrees without a single drop of fuel in its tanks. When you work around bad guys long enough, you learn how to tell when a suspect is trying to disappear into a crowd. Out there in the dark, that dead hunk of metal was intentionally steering itself into our blind spots, hovering right over our heads like a stalker waiting in the driveway. It adjusted its path precisely to stay hidden from our ground-based radar arrays. The part that still keeps me awake at night is the audio track they pulled during the tracking blackout of '84. A buddy of mine smuggled a copy out on a cassette tape, and I listened to it in my car. When you scrub out the high-frequency squeal of the space radiation, you can hear something buried deep in the static. It's this wet, heavy sound that hits every 4 seconds. It sounds exactly like a person trying to catch their breath through a cracked oxygen mask. Just a slow, mechanical wheeze looping forever. It makes your blood turn to ice because you know for a fact there's nobody alive up there. The sound wasn't synthesized. It had the distinct acoustic imperfections of a biological throat struggling against a vacuum. Now the whole file is completely buried, and the agency acts like Relay 2 was just a daydream. The very last page of the declassified report is completely blacked out with a marker, except for this one tiny note some flight director scribbled in the margin. It says the source of the upload cannot be verified as terrestrial, and we have no idea where the satellite actually is anymore. Think about it. We built a machine, we threw it away in the dark, and something else picked it up, fixed it, and aimed it right back at our heads. Every time I look up at the night sky now, I don't see stars. I just see an empty graveyard full of open eyes, waiting for the next transmission. The pale green glow of a cathode ray tube screen always makes me feel cold inside. It was late autumn in 1961, and my brother and I were hunkered down in our handmade listening post, the Tower of Judica Cordiglia, just outside Turin. Everyone else was listening to official radio broadcasts, but we had our antennas aimed straight at the Soviet space frequencies. We weren't looking for ghosts. We were just 2 tech-obsessed kids looking for a thrill. Then the tracking equipment spiked violently, and this rhythmic, scratching sound tore through our headsets. It was a human heartbeat, skipping beats, slowing down in real time until it flattened into absolute nothingness. My brother looked over at me, his face completely pale, and whispered that we just listened to a man die in the thermosphere. The official Soviet news station was playing upbeat classical music right then, completely silent about any launch. But you don't forget the sound of a fading pulse trapped inside a metallic coffin. We sat there in the dark, staring at the dead static, realizing Moscow had just erased a human being from existence. I couldn't sleep for a week after that, so I started digging into the secret launch windows. The Soviet space program looked flawless on television, full of smiling pilots, pristine rockets, and grand promises of a communist future. But if you knew how to read the orbital telemetry like we did, you could see the massive gaps in the timeline. Before Yuri Gagarin ever made his historic flight, our tracking logs picked up multiple unannounced launches that simply disappeared from the radar screens. The true horror of the space race isn't the vast, freezing void of the cosmos. It's the human cover-up that completely deletes your life the second you fail the state. We tracked these phantom capsules ascending into high orbit, only to watch their trajectories slowly drift out into the deep dark because their life support systems had completely failed. The engineers back on Earth didn't try to save them. They just stopped recording the data. They left those pilots to drift into the silent void until the oxygen ran out, pretending the rockets were never even fueled. The absolute worst recording we ever intercepted happened during the spring of '62, and it still haunts my dreams. The screen dimmed to a dark crimson tint as the signal broke through the cosmic radiation, revealing a woman's frantic voice speaking rapid Russian. She was breathing heavily, her words clipping against the heavy static of the atmospheric friction. "Isn't this dangerous? Talk to me. I am hot. I see a flame." The audio stretched and warps violently as her capsule underwent re-entry at the completely wrong angle. You could hear the raw, unedited panic in her voice, a terrifying realization that she was burning alive inside a malfunctioning titanium shell. Moscow completely denied the existence of any female cosmonauts at that time, keeping the official records pristine. But the tape doesn't lie, and the agony in her transmission was undeniably human. The transmission cut out with a sharp, high-pitched squeal that sounded like metal tearing apart under immense heat. She died completely alone, screaming into a microphone that her own government had already turned off. We started cross-referencing the official Soviet Vostok capsule registries, and that's when the mathematical anomalies really started to mess with my head. If you look at the public records, specific serial numbers are completely skipped in the manufacturing sequence, leaving massive blank spaces in the logistics logs. Through my personal contacts with European radar operators, I found out that those missing numbers belonged to secret, high-altitude military launches. These weren't unmanned cargo tests. The telemetry signatures showed the exact weight and thermal displacement of a pressurized crew cabin. They were launching people into orbit using untested, volatile booster configurations just to beat the Americans to the next milestone. When a capsule overshot its mark, the controllers at Baikonur would simply purge the data logs and assign the serial number to a completely different project. It was a massive assembly line of human sacrifice, hidden right behind a wall of bureaucratic ink. The pilots became non-persons before their bodies even grew cold in the upper atmosphere, floating forever as unlisted debris. The psychological weight of this cover-up really hit me when I read a smuggled diary from a remote tracking outpost in Siberia. The text described the absolute horror of a midnight shift where the operators received a perfectly clear voice transmission from a lost capsule. The cosmonaut wasn't screaming or begging for his life. He was completely calm, his voice dropping into a rhythmic monotone. He was just reciting his family's names and his home address over and over to an empty planet. He knew his retro rockets had failed and that he was drifting away from Earth forever, but he just wanted someone to know he existed. The tracking station staff were ordered to shut off their monitors and walk away from the consoles while the transmission was still active. They had to sit in the break room, drinking hot tea in total silence, while a comrade drifted into the freeze. The state had already deleted his military records, rendering him a ghost while he was still breathing into his microphone. The steady hum of a cleanroom server rack always reminds me of a digital morgue. It was mid-2013, and I was analyzing the raw deep-field data streams from the Kepler Space Telescope at NASA's Ames Research Center. The public knew Kepler as this incredible planet hunter, tracking tiny dips in starlight to find distant worlds. But inside the mission operations logs, the telescope was staring at things that defied standard astrophysics. We started noticing these massive, irregular drops in brightness from a target sector near the Cygnus constellation. It wasn't the clean, symmetrical curve of a spherical planet passing by its sun. The graphs showed jagged, geometric silhouettes blocking up to 20% of the star's total light. My team lead pulled me into a private office and told me the anomaly was just an instrumentation artifact, ordering me to delete the localized data run. But you don't forget the sight of a shadow that looks exactly like an artificial grid, floating thousands of light years away. I knew right then we weren't looking at a natural orbital body. We were looking at something engineered on a scale that makes our entire planet look like a speck of dust. The corporate narrative shifted completely when Kepler suddenly suffered a catastrophic reaction failure, rendering the telescope completely blind. The agency released a massive public relations statement blaming standard mechanical wear and tear for the sudden end of the primary mission. But the internal system logs tell a very different story about that exact midnight shift. The hardware crash occurred less than 3 minutes after the main computer began downloading a massive, unencrypted data packet from the anomalous coordinates. The internal telescope sensors didn't experience a mechanical breakdown. The processor was completely overwhelmed by an incoming transmission that fried the guidance control architecture. It felt like someone had intentionally flashed a high-powered spotlight right into our night vision goggles to force us to look away. We tried to reboot the secondary arrays, but the telemetry stream was locked out by an external administrative override command. The agency used the physical breakdown as a convenient excuse to stop publishing the live data feeds from that sector. They cut the public connection, moved the project to a classified military server, and told the engineering staff to pack up their personal belongings. I managed to salvage a set of the raw light curves on a flash drive before the security team cleared out our desks. When you look at a normal transit graph, the starlight dips smoothly and recovers at a perfectly predictable rate. The data lines I have from the hidden Kepler logs look like a jagged mountain range, showing massive, asymmetrical spikes that shouldn't exist in physics. The mathematical models suggested an object millions of miles wide, yet light enough to drift and adjust its speed across the stellar face. It looked exactly like a massive, modular structure changing its physical configuration in real time to capture energy. I showed the raw data to a colleague, and his hands started shaking as he ran the numbers through our structural analysis program. The software kept throwing error codes because the dimensions of the object didn't match any known planet or asteroid composition. It was an impossible silhouette, a cosmic megastructure lurking right in our target field, while the official press releases claimed the telescope was just tracking regular gas giants. We were staring at an active cosmic construction site, completely hidden behind a wall of redacted data grids. The cover-up got significantly dirtier when independent civilian astronomers started downloading the public archive files to verify the Cygnus data. They quickly discovered that specific day logs from the Kepler mission had been completely replaced with corrupted, unreadable null sectors. Someone didn't just hide the initial findings. They went into the historical databases and literally tore pages out of the digital ledger. I watched the community forums erupt with questions, only for the threads to be systematically deleted by automated moderation bots within seconds. The psychological pivot from a scientific breakthrough to an institutional betrayal hit me hard. The agency was actively gaslighting the entire global astronomy community to keep a lid on the coordinates. They told the world the missing files were just the result of a telemetry drop during the telescope's hardware failure. But data drops don't create perfectly clean, targeted redactions on the exact days the largest starlight anomalies were recorded. They were intentionally scrubbing the timeline, leaving a digital void where the evidence of an artificial structure used to be. The closer the public looked at the sky, the faster the agency worked to turn the lights out on the data. The absolute craziest part of the project happened when a small group of rogue analysts converted the starlight variations into audio frequencies. Using advanced data sonification programs, they turned the light curves into raw sound waves to check for repeating mathematical structures. What should have been a smooth, low-frequency hum sounded instead like a chaotic, metallic lattice breaking apart and reforming. It was this terrifyingly dense, industrial soundscape that sounded exactly like heavy machinery operating inside a hollow chamber. You could hear distinct, rhythmic pulses that didn't align with stellar rotation or solar flare activity. It felt less like listening to a star and more like bugging the engine room of a massive, alien factory ship. I listened to the audio file in the dark, and the hairs on my neck stood up because the pattern felt deliberate. The acoustic spikes matched the exact intervals of the binary code we had flagged in the early telemetry logs. Someone was broadcasting an active operational log across the deep field, using the star's own light as a carrier wave to beam the signal straight into our instruments. The internal tension peaked when a senior data analyst from the second light mission leaked a series of automated system alerts. The documents proved that even after the reaction wheel failure, Kepler's safety shutters were being triggered by intense localized light bursts. The telescope wasn't malfunctioning. Its optical sensors were being deliberately blinded by high-energy, monochromatic laser pulses originating from the empty void between the stars. The tracking system kept trying to lock onto the source, but the coordinates were shifting faster than the telescope could physically swing. It was like someone was playing with a laser pointer, intentionally messing with our collection arrays from a distance of several hundred light-years. The analyst's log entries described a sense of deep paranoia spreading through the clean rooms as the bursts grew more frequent. The system wasn't recording natural cosmic phenomena. It was tracking an active counterintelligence measure designed to corrupt our digital imaging sensors. The final alert entry before the channel went dark was just a single line of automated system diagnostic text. Optical arrays saturated by non-solar coherent light source. Direct sensor tracking disabled by operator. The strangest element of the entire Kepler project was the persistent background signature that contaminated the secondary data streams. The logs reveal that even when the telescope turned away from the Cygnus sector for calibration, the telemetry remained corrupted by a phantom code. It was a repeating digital ghost that seemed to follow the telescope's focus, no matter where we pointed the main mirror. The signal didn't change its frequency or intensity based on our orientation, meaning the source wasn't a distant star at all. The transmission was already inside our software, embedded deep within the telescope's primary operational firmware before it ever launched. The realization hit me like a physical punch to the gut. We didn't discover an anomaly out in the deep field. The anomaly had been built into our hardware from day one, using the telescope to send data out under the guise of collecting starlight. The true crime wasn't happening light years away. It was an inside job executed right in our own fabrication labs, turning our greatest instrument into a cosmic beacon. The psychological betrayal solidified when I compared public statements from SETI researchers with internal operational emails from the exact same week. On television, agency spokespeople confidently assured the public that exhaustive radio sweeps of the Cygnus coordinates showed absolutely zero signs of life. But the leaked internal emails showed that the world's largest radio dishes were quietly pulled off their scheduled targets. They were immediately turned toward the Kepler anomalies in absolute secrecy, running continuous interception routines for 72 hours straight. The public was given a comfortable lie to keep them from panicking, while the global intelligence community scrambled to catch the echo. The hypocrisy was total. They were actively listening to a signal while telling the world the sky was completely empty and dead. I looked at the tracking schedules, and the military had classified the radio data under a high-level national security directive. They didn't want the public to know that the silence in the void was entirely artificial, a curtain pulled down by our own governments to hide a conversation we weren't supposed to hear. The final data dump from the telescope in late 2018 was the absolute breaking point for my own sanity. Just before Kepler ran out of fuel and was officially deactivated, it executed an unprompted, automated sensor sweep of the empty dark. The log showed a highly detailed thermal mapping of the space between stars, a region that should register at absolute zero. Instead, the sensors picked up a massive, interconnected network of heat signatures stretching across multiple light-years. The void wasn't cold, empty space. It was radiating temperatures warm enough to suggest the presence of an active, functioning infrastructure. The telescope captured the faint, glowing outline of a cosmic web connecting the anomalous star systems before its transmitters were permanently cut off. The final telemetry packet didn't end with a standard system shutdown command. It ended with a massive data wipe that originated from inside the instrument itself. The machine destroyed its own data archives before we could save the images, leaving us with nothing but a blank screen and a collection of corrupted system files. Now the entire Kepler mission is treated like ancient history, and the files are locked inside a secure archive that requires top-level clearance. The very last line of the declassified mission overview is completely blacked out, except for a handwritten note left by the last project director. It states that the telescope did not stop working due to a lack of fuel, but was intentionally terminated to prevent further data contamination. Think about the physical reality of what that means. We built an incredibly sophisticated eye, launched it into the dark to search for a home, and immediately found something looking back. We panicked, broke our own toy, and buried the data logs so we could pretend we are still alone in the quiet. Every time I look up at the night sky now, I don't see an empty canvas of distant suns. I see a massive, glowing network of hidden infrastructure, waiting for us to finally grow up and open our eyes to the transmission.